Welcome to an introduction to information science. My approach to an introduction is not just to say, see what the book says, and let's just simply systematically go through that. That's very canned and so forth. I want to use a little bit of a fresher approach to see how the thought about information science makes sense, that you can connect with this. So welcome to this introduction to information science. I always find an introduction to any discipline quite exciting because it opens up new vistas, makes you check with what you already know and say, yep, okay, this I already know, but here's something new. And oh, this is the logic behind and so forth. It's a wonderful discovery that then really opens up the field to you and your interests in this field. So let's take a look. The first thing is, can it be recorded? Can information be recorded? If it cannot be recorded, guess what? Then it's not part of information science. So let's look at what can be recorded. So what can be recorded? That's the big thing. So let's take an entity that's now recorded. Okay, you obviously want to store it. So okay, so if you can't store it, you know, you've got a problem. So if you can store it, can you retrieve it again? Obviously, it makes sense. But you're right, you want to be able to read. Then, can you move this? And that's very important in the science, is can you move your information? But then also, can you disseminate the information? And you know the difference between movement and disseminate. If I take my hard drive from work to home, I've moved my information, but I've not disseminated it. So key thing there. And then, can I protect my information? A really key piece. So then there's another way to look at it and saying, okay, so you've got this entity information. Now, what can you do with this thing? And that gets into an interesting thing. In other words, the analysis of information and the manipulation of information. That manipulation of information is a big deal today, because so many derivatives can be created, and attribution is sometimes very difficult because of what's happened to it in the due course and path. So interesting challenges with legal and ethics and also and so forth that flows from that. So here are some of the common fields in information science. Theory. Every science has a basis of theory. So, yep, no surprise. And so in some of your readings, you'll engage with theory. And that's important. That's the grounded logic from which we come, a common understanding of our premises of what is truth and what are the bounds that we deal with. So organization of information is very important as you think of databases, libraries, and so forth. Key piece. Then retrieval of information. So interesting things, cataloging and was an old thing in library science, obviously. Database design, and obviously to retrieval, you also deal with security and with access and permissions and things like that. Then information behavior and users. So this really looks at people using information, a very key field that's blossoming. How do people seek information? What's the logic that they flow with? What premises do they have? What do you do when someone doesn't know what they don't know? And yet they need to get to something. It's kind of like walking down a hallway and there's a door, but it looks just like the wall, and you don't know it, so you don't look there for an entrance, And so how can you be alerted to that? That's where education, psychology, and sociology kicks in as supplementary fields to guide us in this user behavior. And then knowledge representation. That's kind of part of the AI game. That is to be able to infer and to develop reasoning and the different types of engines developed that we use in AI. Also a blossoming field, as I may say. Okay, then a common one is digital libraries and archives. And what's the difference between an archive and a library? Interesting stuff to explore. So now we're coming to a final thing that I want to address, and that is obviously if you have information, you also have disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is where you intend to deceive. Misinformation is you got your facts wrong. So take a look at this whole game now. There we see deep fakes as a big field arising, and some of these deep fakes are incredibly good, where you can take the president of the country, make him or her say stuff that was never said, but they use their voice and the whole thing, and everybody believes this is legit. And so sometimes to trace the authenticity of something becomes very complex. So let's take a look at some historical evidence here. I've thrown all of that out. I remember reading about the translations of the Bible and so forth, and fascinating, what I found is how difficult it was to sometimes attribute who the authors of some of the New Testament books, for example. And there's not 100% certainty, even what we have today as the canonized version is. Was this all written by who we thought it was written? And these alterations could be simply, yes, it was the original, but because it was all with ink and feathers, stuff was added to a copy, and it was really well done, and it made a lot of sense, and it seems actually, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be. And so now an embellished version or an intentionally changed version might be seen as the authentic version. And others like, oh, they just didn't copy properly. So you see these interesting things. And then there were people that said, hey, I'm going to pretend to be one of these scholars, and I'm going to write a book and disseminate it as if a lost found book. And fascinating stuff, so the apocryphal books and so forth. So it's a whole interesting thing. It's not as simple and clear as we think it is. So that's taking a look at a Bible as an example. If you look at art, amazing stories of people that have faked art and have done so well that today many museums are displaying fake art, and they cannot tell whether this is the legit thing or not. And they have to live with it. So once again, there's intent. It's historical. It's not new to human beings. It's not just now on the internet and in current days. It's as old as humanity, where people try to recreate truth or adjust it to suit their own needs. So, manuscripts, many manuscripts face that same problem. What lies behind it is often politics, greed, personal interests, and all these hidden agendas. The whole thing of conspiracy theories fits into this. Now, I want to touch on conspiracy theories just briefly, because for some of you, say conspiracy theories, you roll your eyes and say, yeah, them kooks. And in some cases that's true, but not always. And I want to show you some examples. But I want to preface it with something important. What's really important as a student at the university is I need to challenge you in your premises. This is something I really value in every human. And I'm going to use the example of one of my professors when I did my PhD. He was very clear and outspoken and excited about the field. And because he was so outspoken and clear, he didn't seem cautious, he seemed bold. And that made people want to challenge him. And in one meeting, someone stood up and says, Dr. Merrill, this is now in a conference, in 1974, you said, and I quote, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. What have you got to say about that today? He stood back and he says, well, I don't agree with myself at all on that point anymore. And it just deflated the guy because he thought, now I got you. And Dr. Merrill expressed such a beautiful truth. And that is, yes, we make assumptions. We do go by what we know at the time. And then as we find out more, we realize, oh, okay, I've changed my view on this. Now, I know in politics, if you change your view, you're seen as a flip-flopper and bad. But in my book, that's what's supposed to happen in our lives as we expand our horizons, as we look at a bigger picture, to realize who we are, what the world is all about, and so forth. And it's not just your initial assumptions are always correct, and don't worry about the rest. You got it. So challenge yourself constantly. and feel free to explore, because this is what it's about. So you want to give you some interesting examples here. Go back in time. Going back in time gives you fantastic views. There was a time when we believed the earth was flat. Everybody believed the earth was flat. And then a few rebels questioned that logic and say, maybe the earth is round. What? I mean, we live on a ball? No, we live on the earth. Conceptually, it was so hard to see we live on a ball instead of just a flat earth, because you just see the earth stretch out in all directions. No, the earth is flat. And so you could have been seen as a conspiracy theorist, or some falsehood you're spreading, just because you came up with this idea of a round earth. And initially, people were not open to this at all. In fact, quite a few people died because they believed that. So that's an interesting point to set. In other words, if the masses go there, it doesn't mean, okay, that's the way to go. There's, in many cases, specific ways and reasons why people believe, whether it's their ego, whether it's some other interest that they try to protect, why they push something. And we always have to really be honestly seeking for truth, and that's why information is so key in this field. So if you look at medicine in the old days, they believed in the four humors, and humors come from a Greek word basically meaning fluid. Phlegm, blood, black bile, and yellow bile, with the logic of phlegm was cold and wet, blood hot and wet, black bile cold and dry, and yellow bile hot and dry. And they built a whole world on that, and logic and everything, and that's all gone. Today, that's zero. It's gone. Once again, if you challenge that in the old days, you can see the resistance that you faced. So I hope this overview gives you an interesting teaser into the field. So now I encourage you to dig into the readings and reflect on it. Don't just read and be done. Think about, what have I read? What does this mean? Because these are the fundamentals. And so it's not something to say, I read it, and 2 weeks later I ask you, so what's the basis? Tell me about what is information science? Would be nice if you could start saying, okay, let's ask ourselves first, can you record it or not? If you cannot, it's not part of it. If you can record it, well, what matters when you can record something? Well, you want to store it, you want to retrieve it, you want to move it, you want to disseminate it, and of course you want to protect it, especially digital, but also otherwise, times when people wanted to steal information and get to it physically. Okay, and then what do you want to do with this piece of information? You want to analyze it, and manipulate it. So if you've got that kind of a basis in your mind, you're on a good track. But if you can't remember that, that's important. So there are some things that are just good to know, and other things that are really important to remember, because they need to be operative in your mind, that you can refer to it and not say, yeah, I read it once. No, you need to know it as fresh information that's part of you. So at the basis of this, I hope that happens for you. And then as we dealt with the common fields, that it makes sense for you in where we go. Thank you very much, and enjoy your readings.